almost 3 weeks away from the start of free agency. As we know, Brad Stevens elevated to president of basketball ops, so they'll build this thing in his vision, at least to some degree, more so than Danny Ainge, with him as a consultant. But obviously, Ime Udoka, the head coach, is going to have a say in this. But it is very clearly, as it was last year as well, but now in a time of turnover, it's very clearly Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown's team. You have Marcus Smart as a foundational piece as well. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think if you definitely listen to Brad, listen to Ime, I think it becomes that much more apparent that Marcus Smart's not going anywhere. But building this thing out, what does this look like this offseason? What should the main priorities be?
I think that there's two things that I think the Celtics are really going to need to take a look at. Number one, I think obviously from last year, what we saw is they need more veterans. They have to figure out a way to build that up. And I think that's something that Brad Stevens is going to want to do. I think, we can't know for sure. I don't think Brad will ever tell us, but I think that he probably would have preferred to not have as many young guys over the last, 2-3 years, so that he had to try to work into the rotation, that, he had to try to build a contender around. It's hard to build a contender with role players who are all that young. So I think that was one of the major problems last year. So I think the Celtics will probably, my guess would be they would probably take a hard look at, maybe trading some of the young guys and seeing what kind of veterans they could bring back, or that type of thing. And then I think, I think the Celtics, it is probably time for the Celtics to take some big picture looks at what this team is at, going forward. They have an entirely new front office, an entirely new coaching staff. I think there's an opportunity here, maybe not this offseason, maybe before the trade deadline, whatever it is, build this team up, see what it can be. But I think, be ready to pivot, because if this thing doesn't work, what you really don't want to do is waste this opportunity with two young stars who are both wings, who are both, incredibly valuable players. You can't waste this. So whatever you do, sure, if you want to kind of run it back, with a very similar core for this season with some veterans and see how it would look, I think that makes sense. But I also think be ready to be nimble. That would be, I think, what they need to do over the next few months. Keep a close eye on it, see how things are progressing. And if it isn't progressing well, be ready to question, be ready to question what's next, because I think those questions are fair at this point.
Yeah, I think the bench is obviously the biggest question mark here. And you talk about filling out the coaching staff. They fill out some more guys, and we have no idea what this is going to look like. I'm excited because it's new blood, fresh blood, to see what it looks like, different perspective, all those things, and how they handle each guy and their assignments. Like Damon Stoudemire is going to primarily probably work with Marcus Smart and Peyton Pritchard, and we'll see with is it Yamadar? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay, good. At least I think I'm saying that right. We'll see what happens there, and it's this team needs to find its identity again. I think last year they had a sort of identity crisis, and they've switched things up to change their identity. So I think they have to find a new one. And what does that look like now with Jason Tatum as a centerpiece is a very interesting question. I love some of the guys they've been able to draft over the years. But now it's time to see what they really have. Okay, Romeo Langford, you have one more shot here to try and figure out what the hell what your NBA career is going to look like. But you look at the end of the bench and you look at potential targets, so to speak, that they might look at. Some people are obsessing over the backup point guard spot. Some people are obsessing over the fact that they have a real lack of big depth outside of Al Horford and Rob Williams, who, Rob gets hurt quite often and Al's up there in age. And after that, it's Moses Brown and Grant Williams playing center. So if you were, Brad Stevens, president of basketball operations, or, we'll see whoever ends up in the GM spot, whether that's Allison Feaster or whether that's going to be Landry Fields or whatever Mike Zarin is, I don't know, not quite sure. What would be your primary, is it re-signing Evan Fournier? What's the first thing that you think that the Celtics need to get done?
Yeah, I think it's re-signing Evan Fournier. I think that's the big one. And then I think number two, yeah, you touched on it there. You need to figure out what you're doing with Rob Williams, because he has, obviously he can get a contract extension. You might be able to get some real value for him. Obviously, you're concerned because of all the injuries and stuff, but I imagine Rob and his agent probably are too, right? That they are also looking at this landscape and thinking okay, you can roll the dice. And if Rob has another, if Rob stays healthy and has a season similar to the one that he, to the flashes that we saw this last year, he's probably a 20 million a year guy or like, something close to that. Like he's making a ton of money. And if he isn't healthy, I mean, he's making a lot less than he would this offseason. So I think you have a chance now to kind of evaluate what you want to do with Rob, evaluate maybe you get like really good value on a starting quality big man who, has a really high ceiling. I think that's a really important question too. I think the primary one is Fournier because, like Fournier just adds more like scoring punch, more, it's not quite star power, but it's like sub-star power, if that makes sense. Like he's like right there, but not quite. Like he adds that little bit of punch that you really need. So I think he's the most important. But I think a close second is what to do with Rob, because the potential is there to have a super high value player on a super value contract, or spend a bunch of money on a guy who can't stay on the floor. Like it's a really tough question, and I think that's a really important one for the Celtics.
I don't know if you feel this way, but definitely some people that we've talked to on this show and outside the show seem to. Do you think it's a foregone conclusion that Fournier's back in Boston? A lot of people seem to feel that is the case, and I do wonder. I guess maybe it's just me being influenced by those that again we've heard from, but I'm starting to wonder exactly how sought after this guy is going to be, or if Boston is just willing to not overpay, but pay him high market value to bring him back versus kind of giving him something right there in the middle and challenging him to get more elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, like because he's not, he's not restricted. So like if you give him something in the middle and challenge him to get something else elsewhere, if he gets it, then he might just bounce. Like he might just be kind of like annoyed that the Celtics were, trying to lowball him. So yeah, I mean I think I would, if I were the Celtics, I would probably try to offer him something like mid to high market value and just like let him know like, hey, like we really value you. Like this is kind of where we have you. We would love to bring you back. But I mean, he is kind of tricky in that way. Like you don't want to, you don't want to commit too much money for too long to him because you don't know how much substar value he has. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would be very surprised if he was elsewhere. I think that the path for the Celtics to acquiring, his level of talent is really difficult without re-signing him. But yeah, it's going to be a complicated conversation. I think he'll be back, but the number is going to be really hard to nail down.
Hi guys, Cedric.